The World Beyond the Headlines lecture series is a project of the University of Chicago Center for International Studies.
Before I introduce our two guests, I'd just like to say a word about some of the really fantastic summer opportunities that Kathy and her colleagues at the Career Advising Office have made available to aspiring student journalists. The Pulitzer Center on Crisis Reporting, as Kathy mentioned, one of the sponsors of this event and one of the sponsors of Dimiter's work on Shale Gas, has partnered with the university to send one student fellow abroad for the summer to report on any subject of that student's interest in any area of that student's interest. The Pulitzer Center is a truly unique institution. It's a nonprofit media organization that's defining how public service journalism and investigative reporting is done in the future. I was fortunate enough, as Kathy mentioned, to travel to Southeast Asia this past summer as a student fellow for them. And I spent 3 months reporting on environmental issues and human trafficking, especially in the region's fishing industry. The experience left me with a really nice suntan, but also a handful of articles, one of which was published as the cover story of a major magazine in Bangkok. This experience is truly, in every sense, a true way to spend your summer, and I encourage all students interested in foreign reporting to apply. Some other opportunities, I'm sure many of you already know about the Metcalf Fellowships offered at the university. These are well-paid summer internships at newspapers, magazines, and media companies around the nation, including one at Calkins Media, which owns 8 newspapers and 3 television stations, and whose vice president is currently with us today. Some upcoming deadlines, just in case if you're interested in applying, are for Forbes and WBEZ Chicago Public Radio. And if neither of these suit you, you're not out of luck yet. Every year there are a couple CCIJ grants, Chicago Careers in Journalism grants, awarded by the university, which fund any unpaid internship you've been able to acquire. It can be anywhere in the world. It can be at any size publication. And you can be at any experience level to apply. The summer after my first year, a CCIJ grant supported me during my first journalism internship at Baltimore Magazine, which got me interested in journalism to apply to, which got me interested in reporting in the first place. So I urge students interested in journalism to make an appointment with Kathy as soon as possible. She's a fantastic resource and can make your summer very rewarding. And now we'll begin with what you're all here for. Dimiter Kenarov is a freelance journalist currently based in Istanbul. His recent work has focused on energy and environmental issues in Poland, Turkey, and Bulgaria, where he was born and raised. Dimiter's writing has appeared in many newspapers and magazines, including Esquire, Outside, The Nation, the International Herald Tribune, and the Boston Review. He's the author of 2 collections of Bulgarian poetry and is a contributing editor for the literary journal, the Virginia Quarterly Review. His work has also been featured twice in the Best American Travel Writing, once in 2009 and once this past year. Stanley M. Ellis is the vice president of Calkins Media and is a 3rd-generation member of the Calkins family. He has previously worked as the publisher of the Burlington County Times, which is a daily newspaper in southern New Jersey that was founded by his grandfather in 1958. Since then, he has served as the company's print and digital operating committees, and in his current role oversees the company's operations and strategic planning. He holds an MBA from the Wharton School and a degree in marketing from Penn State. Please join me in welcoming these 2 guests.
Hello? Hello? No? There we go. How's that? There we go. Okay, now we got the technology out of the way. Yes, I am a 3rd-generation member of the Calkins family, and we are a 75, actually almost 76-year-old media company. We started in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, back in 1937. S.W. Calkins was the founder of the company. And we've grown over the years by focusing on local community journalism to grow into 5 dailies, a weekly in southern Florida, 3 television stations, all ABC affiliates. And also we published a military newspaper in southern New Jersey. And of course, our latest foray, one of the reasons we're here this evening, is for the Shale Reporter. .com, and of course the companion project with the Pulitzer Center. I would like to thank Kathy Anderson and the folks here at University of Chicago for being one of the hosts for this evening and helping us put this program together, and of course the good friends at the Pulitzer Center for really helping us take this project to a whole new level with Dimiter's work. It's been a real great project for us to work on. Today we are a local media company dedicated to the idea that we can build a path to the future and not watch local media die away by focusing on building a tremendous pool of talent and giving them the tools to do the job so that we can continue to cover our communities and perhaps cover them better than we ever have in the past. Which brings us to why we're here tonight. It's actually twofold on my part. Number one, we are here, as was mentioned earlier, to do some interviews for the Metcalf Scholar. Kathy and her team were kind enough to have Calkins Media be an eligible candidate for the scholarship. And so we'll be doing some interviewing tomorrow for that. But we're also here to, as I said, to talk about acquiring as much talent as we possibly can. We're always on the look for bright, inquisitive minds who can help us build that path to the future. So we do have some information, and Emily Dressler, who's in the back, will have more information if you're interested in talking with us about internship opportunities with Calkins Media. The main reason, of course, we're here tonight is to talk about fracking and the Shale Reporter and the special series that Dimiter and Steve Sapienza worked on. This, for us, was a glimpse, we think, of our future as a media company. As I said, what's held us together for 75 years is that focus on local community journalism and what's important to our readers and to the people in our community. And when it came to this particular issue, it wasn't long after things started happening in western Pennsylvania, where we have two properties, Uniontown Herald Standard and the Beaver County Times, that residents were coming to us saying, what's going on? Some people were saying, this is the greatest thing ever. We have jobs. We no longer have 15-20% unemployment. Others were saying, this is a disaster going somewhere to happen, and what do we do about it? So one of our owners, Sandra Hardy, who I want to thank for her efforts, really got this thing off the ground. She put in some of her own personal funds to get the program started, and then the board of directors at our company picked up the ball and said, we'll take it from here. But we are a smaller media company in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Florida, and we just didn't have the resources to really give it the kind of oomph that it needed. So the folks at Pulitzer came in and really helped to bring this thing to a whole nother level. As I said, it's a glimpse in our future in terms of looking at the type of journalism that we think we can now do and using tools to tell the story in a much better way than we ever could tell it before. So we're very excited to be part of this project. We're very happy to have Dimiter here this evening, and I'm glad I haven't had a chance to meet Dimiter before this evening. I've read his work, obviously, but hadn't had a chance to really meet him, so we had a chance to talk. And I will hand him over the program, and you can take it from here. Dimiter, thank you so much.
Thank you, Stan. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks, Adam, as well. Well, I see we have a big crowd here today. I have to tell you that, first off, I'll be honest. This is the hardest project I've ever worked on. I've covered serial killers in Macedonia. I've covered the war in Iraq. I was in prison in Belarus. Nothing has been like this, like shale gas. I feel I was thrown in sort of a feeding frenzy somewhere and trying to fend off for myself. It's been such a hot issue, right? Everybody's been talking about shale gas for the last couple of years. There's been Gasland, there's been Truthland. Now, Matt Damon came out with a movie. Yoko Ono got involved. It's been a complete madness. And on the one hand, you have the industry folks, presenting things in their own way. And on the other hand, you have environmentalists who are looking at it from their own point of view. And really, it's been really confusing. I have these Google alerts, right, on shale gas. I mean, it's full every day, like 15, 20 articles on shale gas, and it's really hard to keep track of all of this. Now, I have to tell you perhaps how this whole project started for me personally. As Stan mentioned, I'm originally from Bulgaria, and basically this shale gas issue has been going global, as you probably know, and it was basically in 2011 when Chevron, the corporation, came over to Bulgaria and Romania as well, Poland. I'll talk a bit more about this. And they received some concessions for exploration for shale gas, since U.S. Energy Department had mentioned that there are good possibilities that in these countries there might be shale gas. Now, what happened in Bulgaria actually in 2012 was something unprecedented. In January of last year, basically, there were, after this environmental campaign and TV debates and all of this, it became really a hot issue in Bulgaria. And in January, basically, people in 12 cities around the country came out, thousands of people, and to protest, this. And the government was forced to put a moratorium on the practice. It was the second one after France did so in 2011. But so for me, actually, the issue was not shale gas. I was not looking into this at that point. I was looking at sort of the resurgence of environmental movements around Eastern Europe, because it seems really interesting how after '89, after the Cold War ended, and people were so excited about democracy and about rights and what would happen in the country. And things went bad really quickly. I mean, there was basically, as some of you may know, what happened was that the Communist Party privatized their own power, right? They took over all the resources, all the factories, so on. It happened not only in Bulgaria, in Poland, in the former Soviet Union, and people, because they didn't have this tradition of civic activism, they weren't taught this really, and sort of they withdrew from public life for a long time, for many years. And somehow common space wasn't common. It was like the tragedy of the commons, right? It was nobody's space. And I think maybe this was one of the biggest, the worst legacies of communism, that it actually ironically destroyed the idea of common space, because people were somehow forced put together without realizing how do we use that common space. In any case, what happened was that in the last 2 years, and around shale gas specifically, these movements have been coming out, environmental movements, and they have really revitalized Bulgarian civil society. In Romania as well, this has happened very strangely. And not only shale gas, GMO issues, and so on and so forth. So at first I was looking at this issue just as sort of a social issue, environmentalism, how the resurgence of civil society really. But the more I got involved into this issue, the more complex it became, and the more interested I became in this issue. It was geology, it was economics, it was politics, it was environment, it was so many things. And I decided that, well, I'm going to do it. I'm going to try to do this project that involves not only Europe, but also the United States, and sort of look at how things stand. Look at the benefits, look at the drawbacks, and look at and look at it not only from the purely, a lot of the reporting has been coming from purely environmental perspective. I wanted to do the economics of it as well. I wanted to see how it works, especially in Poland. And I'll explain a little bit about why Poland is important. But I wanted to look at the economic side. I wanted to see the geopolitical side, because this has been a foreign policy issue as well. It's a lot of talk about energy independence, about alliances, between countries being rearranged because of this new resource. And the U.S. State Department has been involved as well. So I really wanted to look at this from a complex kind of point of view, interdisciplinary point of view, really. So some of you might find some of the information a little bit dry about the economics of this. I'll jump on afterwards, a little bit on environmental issues as well. But sort of this is the background of how I started doing this. And I don't know, because we have such a big crowd here. I'm sure if I were reading poetry, nobody would have shown up. But since we have such a big crowd, I decided, I'm going to do the Frack 101 thing, in 5 minutes, because I think it's important sort of to know what technology we're talking about, and sort of just to have a quick overview of the issues. I'm sure probably most of you know tons about it. If you feel, you want to zone out and check your Facebook for like 5 minutes, that's completely fine. Yeah, I just wanted to do the sort of the quick overview, just to let you guys know, just so that we can be on the one page, because with fracking and shale gas, things could get so complicated. It's like two baseball fans talking to each other, and you don't know what's going on. So yeah. Anyway, it all starts with a stone, right? I mean, it's a little bit explained like watching paint dry, but this is a shale rock, and basically, I mean, this is the hero or the culprit, whatever, however you wanna define it. And so shale is a sedimentary rock. It was formed hundreds of millions of years ago from single cell organisms in the seas. They were slowly buried under the bottom under layers of sediment. And once they were buried deep enough where pressure and temperature was right enough, they were cooked, so to speak, either into gas or oil. I mean, that's how gas or oil occur. And shale rock is sort of the source rock of oil and gas. Now, people have known for many years this, and they have known that there are so many, there's gas in oil, in shale, but technologies have not developed to that extent so that it could be extracted economically. Now, fracking or well stimulation, as sometimes the industry would call it, has existed since 1947, 1948. But the type of hydraulic fracturing that's happening right now, the high volume slick water hydraulic fracturing, has, so this is the term that they use, has been happening really since the early 2000s, when actually two technologies came together, horizontal lateral drilling and high volume slick water hydraulic fracturing. So basically the idea is that you drill a vertical part of the well. It depends on, I mean, the depth could be different, depends on the shale. It could be, I mean, there's even shale coming out in Pennsylvania on the surface, right? But usually it's, the Marcellus is between 5,000 and 8,000 feet deep. There are much deeper shales as well. But the idea is to drill a vertical well, and then you do the lateral drilling, the horizontal well, the horizontal part of the leg, because you need, bigger you need to have more contact with a bigger surface, right? Basically, shale is an extremely impermeable rock. It has very low permeability. So the idea is to drill the shale laterally and to inject into the shale between 4 and 7 million gallons of water, together with sand and chemicals, a cocktail of chemicals, some of which are toxic, and in order to basically fissure the rock underneath, and the sand goes in and sort of keeps these openings so the gas can flow out. Now, one of the issues with shale gas has been, of course, the volumes, the pure amount of water used. The second one is that actually there is what is called flowback. When part of the water injected into the well comes back, about 20 to 50%, it depends, comes back on the surface, and it carries not only the original sort of mixture, but also it's very rich in salts, sometimes up to 200 times saltier than seawater, some heavy metals, and occasionally weak radioactivity, depending on the type of shale. For example, the Marcellus is quite a radioactive shale. So the disposal of this water has been one of the other big issues. The use of the water, also the disposal of water, and how do we dispose of it? What do we do with this water? Now, at first, when the industry started, it was put in plastic-lined open pits. Now the industry uses usually containers, metal containers, or it injects all the waste back into what are called Class 2 injection wells. Now this is the industry standard practice of usually injecting waste back in underground. It's been a long program. The injection well has been going on for many years in the States. Now, we can talk about like Class 1, Class 2 injection wells and why they're defined like this and all of this later. But this is one of the other ways to dispose of this. And the industry has recently been trying to recycle the waste because of all the sort of commotion that's been going around this. Now, how some of them do recycle. Now, how economically viable for the companies that is, it's still not clear. As I said, use of water, the flow back, and for me, perhaps one of the most important issues is the very intensity of development. Now, shale gas, unlike conventional gas, it's developed through a bigger cluster of wells. It's not just usually with conventional gas, conventional reservoir, you have maybe one well per 10 square kilometers. Here we have one well per, in the United States, the units are 640 acres usually. So you have to develop basically clusters of units in order to cover the whole surface. So the footprint of this industry is much higher. And I can show you, this is actually, in the Burnett Shale, one of the first shales to be developed in Texas. It's sort of the most dramatic picture. In Pennsylvania, you don't see that necessarily because the terrain is different, the development is not that far ahead yet. But if you look at aerial photos of Pennsylvania, parts like Bradford County or Susquehanna County, Tioga County, you will see this kind of intense development. And of course, it comes with lots of infrastructure around it. Thousands of miles of pipelines and compressor stations, access roads, and so on and so forth. Now, I just saw this actually 2 days ago in the Scientific American. It's quite fascinating. You can actually see the flares from the wells in the Eagle Ford Shale from space. Here's Austin, here's San Antonio, and you can see the flares. I was like, wow, this is fascinating. But it sort of brings me to my last point about shale and the controversies that have been going on. Shale gas has been, shale gas is normal gas, methane, one atom of carbon and 4 of hydrogen, what we burn, to heat our homes and to cook and so on and so forth. So there is no difference, with regular gas, the only difference is the type of rock it's taken out of. And sort of shale gas has been presented oftentimes as the bridge fuel, the cleaner fuel to the time when we can actually build renewable energy on a bigger scale. That has been one of the major sort of issues that the industry and politicians as well have been developing as a line of argument. Now this is also, yes, gas is actually, it is the cleanest of all the fossil fuels, oil and coal. It releases the lowest amount of carbon dioxide. Yet, there are studies, for example, with the Cornell study in 2011, which looked at the entire cycle of emissions from wellhead to burner, as they call it. Basically, one of the issues is flaring, or sometimes they vent the gas. It depends. Usually it's flared. But in this way, the wells that have built-up pressure, that build-up pressure is released. That has to be done. And so methane is oftentimes released or burnt. And methane, as you probably know, the global warming potential of methane is 72 times the potential of carbon dioxide. So even very small amounts of methane into the air, we're talking of the range of 2, 3, 4% emissions, could really offset the benefits of gas. So, again, it's such an interesting part because, MIT came up with a study that, no, actually, shale gas is much cleaner than coal and oil. And then Cornell, on the other side, no, it's not. So even the science is not clear, and there's so much controversy around this. Now, this is, I want to show you just on the map, I mean, it's everywhere. We know where the shales are. This is just basic geology. Here's the Marcellus Shale. Down you have the Barnett in Texas. You have the Fayetteville and Woodford and other big formations. The Marcellus runs under big parts of Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, and New York. As you probably know, New York has a moratorium on the practice, and they call the border between Pennsylvania and New York these days the Great Wall of China. It's pretty fascinating. No, these are the world sort of shales that the U.S. Department of Energy puts out, and these are the ones in Europe. Here's Bulgaria, as you can see, and Romania, and here's Poland. I'm, by the way, fascinated that I'm in the second biggest Polish city in the world after Warsaw. Yeah, so I guess it's a good place to sort of present this. But most of the shales in Poland are situated sort of in the northeast of the country, around Gdansk and Pomerania, and some down in the southeast of the country, which yeah, it's like a little arc here. Now, Poland is. Why I chose Poland, is from the European perspective. It is the country that's spearheading the development of shale gas in Europe. It is there's still no exploitation; it's still on the exploration stage. But sort of Poland is the test case for Europe, whether Europe can develop this kind of resource sustainably, how to develop it, or whether the failure of Poland would basically mean a failure of a development of shale gas in Europe. Now. What's interesting, this is I'm already starting, the little Polish thing. This is from downtown Warsaw, and for me this photo just exemplifies perfectly what's going on in Poland with shale gas. I can just leave it at that. Well, on the right-hand side, there's the Palace of Culture and Science, which was built in the 1950s by the Russians. Actually, they're similar building, the Seven Sisters in Moscow. So it's the tallest building in Poland, and it it used to be called Joseph Stalin's Palace of Culture and Science, and then now it's called Stalin's syringe. But in any case, it exemplifies sort of the legacy of Russia and the Soviet Union in Poland. Now, as you probably know. Poland is not very friendly towards Russia with good reason. It's basically, Russia was part of the powers that partitioned Poland in the late 18th century, together with Prussia and Austria. Then occupied Poland for for the whole 19th century, and then during Second World War, Poland was partitioned again by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. By the way, there is this Polish joke. What would a Pole do if you give him a gun with two bullets and you have a Russian and a German? Who would he kill first? And the answer is he would kill first the German and then the Russian, because first come business and then pleasure. But to understand why shale gas has been so important, and so there's been so much emphasis on shale gas in Poland, is to understand that it's first of all, it's a political issue. Now, Poland imports the majority of its gas from Russia, from Russia's Gazprom, and Russia. Gazprom supplies most of Europe, actually, and the pipelines run through Poland. They run, down south to Bulgaria and Romania, and so what's happening is that Poland really does not want to be dependent on Russia. It's like the argument in the United States about energy independence. But here, energy independence is more of an abstract issue with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is more of a ghost. And Poland and Russia is more real, for Poland. So the development of shale gas has really to do with Poland's dislike of Russia. And I can give you just a quick statistics. Out of more than 1,600 foreign companies in Poland, only 5 are Russian right now. And more than 300 are German. So Poland really wants to move away from Russia. There was a gas crisis in 2006 and 2009 when gas from, there was a big dispute between Ukraine and Russia, and Ukraine was getting subsidized gas and all that. And so Russia did not want to give subsidized gas anymore, so basically all the supplies towards Europe were stopped. And so then the European Union started to think, well, we need to diversify away from Russia. We need to find new ways. And Poland has been very active on this front because of that. Because sort of shale gas is like a pepper spray against the bad Russian bear, basically. That's how I would define it. But it's been really a political issue. Now, the other thing, the other thing is all the new skyscrapers here. There's been a lot of development in Warsaw as well, lots of capital coming in. And Poland, you may know, is one of the closest allies of the United States in Europe. Together with the UK, they've had different kinds of programs. The Missile Shield, which had to base strategic weapons right in Poland, Czech Republic, other places, was one of the big projects of the George W. Bush administration. Now that project failed for different reasons, mostly because of objections from Russia. But right now, the U.S. State Department has been very active in promoting this resource abroad. Basically, they have a program called the Global Shale Gas Initiative. Right now, it's renamed to the a little bit more vague Unconventional Gas Technical Engagement Program. And what's happening is this is on administrative level, governments are doing sort of work together, and the U.S. has been heavily promoting this kind of technology to friendly states, and sort of as a buffer against Russian energy interests. That's at least the thinking within the State Department. I also interviewed some people from the American Embassy in Poland. But generally U.S. ambassadors have come out very strongly in support of shale gas in Eastern Europe. And it's, for me, it looks a little bit strange just because there isn't a national consensus within the U.S. on this issue, and then the State Department already has a policy working at that. So this is very. This is one of the issues. President Obama was in Poland in 2011. One of his speeches that he gave was very much in support of shale gas development. And what else I want to say about this? So basically, the Obama administration, despite the fact that it's been sort of posing itself as the new renewable energy, all of these things, has really supported these developments for their own reasons, of course. Now this is what's happening in Poland right now. This is Mr. Woźniak. Mr. Piotr Woźniak is actually the head national geologist of Poland. He used to be the Minister of Finance of Poland for a while. Now he's working within the Ministry of the Environment, and he's responsible for giving out all the concessions to shale gas companies. Now, Poland, this is what you can see is a map of Poland. You can see this map in every single official's office. It's like, let me roll out the map. And it's almost like you're doing military strategy. But basically, Mr. Woźniak, it's showing the map here. It's about Poland since 2009 has given out about one third of its territory for shale gas exploration. So about 90,000 kilometers. There are 111 concessions, and over 30 companies, are in Poland. Now, basically, the whole thing started. It started in 2009, but the huge sort of excitement around this issue happened in April of 2011 when the U.S. Department of Energy and the Energy Information Administration within the department came up with these huge numbers saying that Poland may hold 5.3 trillion cubic meters of gas, enough for 300 years of supply. Now, the next year, United States Geological Survey, together with Polish Geological Institute, comes up with numbers that are 90% lower. And I want to talk actually, maybe during the Q&A session, we can talk a little about how gas exploration is is done and how we measure the resources, because that's also a very controversial thing. And it all, the Marcellus, the first numbers in the Marcellus were 400 trillion cubic feet of gas. And then again, U.S. Geological Survey, because of more conservative type of methodology, came up with like 80% lower numbers. And here, investments are driven by this kind of stuff, right? By this kind of speculation on how resources are measured. Now, most of the prospective places in Poland are actually in the north of Poland, in Pomerania. Now, Poland has a veritable venerable. Excuse my English. It's one of the most venerable oil industries in the world. It's actually older than the U.S. oil industry. It started in 1853. And so it's been developing gas and oil for a long time, but most of it is based in the southwest of the country around Krakow, if you can imagine what I'm talking about. Now, the northeast hasn't seen much development, only around Gdansk, the port city of Gdansk. It's sort of an industrial city, but generally this part of Poland is pretty pristine and pretty untouched. I mean, it's full of lakes, and it looks very much like Pennsylvania to me. These are, there are lakes everywhere. It's a beautiful, beautiful landscape. So basically, just a couple of pictures I want to show you. Generally, the Polish public has been very supportive of shale gas because, again, of Russia, of the ideology that's going on. I've noticed that the farther away people live from these kind of things, the more supportive they are. It depends. It depends, of course, but in Poland specifically, this is the case. Once you go to these other places out in the countryside where nothing is developed really, and you have to build all these pipelines and fragment the land and so on and so forth, things are different. Now, for example, I spoke to a couple of farmers. I spoke to like ministers and industry officials and farmers and environmentalists and energy analysts, like the whole spectrum of people. But it's interesting, like this guy, Edward Sawicki is his name. He lives in this little hamlet called Ogonki in northern Poland. And there was a company that sort of wanted to do seismic testing on his ground. He didn't allow them, for shale. Then they wrote oral consent on the little form that he had to sign. And sort of the government has really, and companies have really run sort of roughshod over people in these small places without giving them too much information, unfortunately. And that's sort of a concern that a lot of mayors in Poland expressed, that they're not informed of the process and the government just goes ahead and does this. Now, one of the major differences in Poland, farmers do not own their mineral rights. It's the state that owns the mineral rights. So farmers do not really have much of an incentive, like in the States where you could make a couple $100,000, maybe $1 million, by selling off your mineral rights. In Poland, that's not necessarily the case. And so there's been a small movement against shale gas, not a big one. But what's interesting about it is that they're very passionate about it. This guy, Sawicki, drew a whole mural on the back of his barn. He invited a couple of artists to do that. And so he's been living on this farm his family for 350 years. Basically, it was given to his family for military valor during the Battle of Vienna in 1683 by a duchess. They were made gentry at the time. So he's managed, this farm has managed to survive through all the revolutions and wars and everything you can imagine. So, and he has started an organic farm in northern Poland. He has an organic EU certificate. And basically, he was not very excited about this whole development just because it was going, he thought at least that it was going to affect his business and his land. This is a fragment of the piece. It's really interesting stuff. But apart from this, really, one thing I have to tell you, which struck me about environmental movements and people who oppose shale gas in Poland is that they're oftentimes branded as national traitors and agents of Gazprom. It's actually a pretty sustained campaign against them, and also politicians. I spoke to Robert Biedron, who is one of the only politicians in the Polish parliament who speak openly, to question this issue. He's not against shale gas, no. He just wants more debate and more questioning. And he's been branded an agent of Gazprom by the Polish media. So there is sort of this sustained attack, and sort of it's really ironic in a certain sense, because Solidarność, the movement that started sort of the Polish revolution, so to speak, in the early 1980s, they were accused of being enemies of the people at the time. And now most of the people from Solidarność are in power, and they're accusing, this new dissidents, so to speak, of being enemies of the people. So this is the social issue that I wanted to sort of, clarify how generally environmental movements are viewed in Poland. But what I really looked at as well was sort of the economics. And what I found out after speaking to all the officials, industry people, Poland since 2009 until now has drilled only 33 wells, despite all the hot issue, how it's like the big mecca of shale gas in Europe. Only 10 of them have been fracked, and only 2 of them have been horizontally drilled and fracked, which is the full way to find out how much resources they are. Now, results haven't been very, very encouraging. ExxonMobil withdrew from Poland last year. ConocoPhillips, another major, gave up their rights in 70% of their rights in concessions in Poland. Talisman Energy, another company, is thinking of withdrawing. And if you look at the way the stocks of the small wildcatters, the exploration companies, they have plunged by 90%. Because sort of expectations were so huge at first, and then it's nothing. And for Poland to actually understand how much resources it has to drill between 200 and 300 wells only for exploration. And we're talking in 3 years they've drilled 30 wells. So in a sense, there's a vicious circle. On the one hand, companies, if they want to invest in the country, they want to know if there are actual reserves. On the other hand, to prove the actual reserves, you have to drill more and more. So in Poland, basically prices per well have gone up to $15 million per well, compared to Burnett Shale, where they're $5 million. Now, this is because it's deeper. The shale is much deeper. The services are not well developed like they are in the United States. So prices for services are very high, and also, environmental regulations. There are many loopholes. What are the word I'm looking for? Yeah, many things that companies have to hoops, whatever I was. I'm sorry. So many hoops that companies have to jump through, and in a sense, it's been very disappointing for a lot of these companies, a lot of these investors who go to Poland and think, "Wow, it's the next big thing. Let's do it." And actually, only the exploration process takes so long, and it's not. The United States is different because it has had such a developed industry. I can tell you, the U.S. has 2,000 rigs from the world rig fleet, so to speak. The whole of Europe has 70. Poland itself has 11. And they're very specific rigs also for lateral drilling. So you have to order them. They cost $40 million a rig. I spoke to an operator for a fracking company, United Oilfield Services, which is an offshoot of Halliburton. And so they ordered this rig for $40 million, and they ordered a whole fleet for altogether for $150 million. And suddenly all the buzz was gone from Poland. And he told me, if we drill again like 5-10 wells next year, it's just not economical for us. We cannot do this. So I was looking at this industry also from the economic perspective, and it's basically again the Polish politicians, they're always so upbeat about it, and you treat in the newspapers how Poland is the next great thing, but when you talk to industry officials themselves, they're not so sure. So this is sort of like the little talk on Poland, And in Europe, as I said, it's important for Poland. The Polish case is important because it's a showcase for the whole of Europe. It's such a divisive issue in Europe. You know, I mean, I'll tell you a little anecdote. In the French, before they banned fracking, actually, they commissioned 2 reports from their national geologists. One report, I'm sorry, from the government report. And the 2 authors working on the report, you know, they could not agree on where shale gas stood in the national French policy. That one of them wrote one report and the other wrote another report, you know, pro and against. I mean, only the French can do that, I guess. But it's you know, it's been very divisive in Europe, and Poland. That's why, again, I want to explore in Poland, because I feel this is an issue that needs to be looked at from the economic perspective as well, not only from the environmental one. Because, you know, one of the reasons companies go and people are so excited, right? It's the investments and the money and all of this. But it's not necessarily the case. And then I went to Pennsylvania. You thought that this is Poland, right? It's Pennsylvania. So in Pennsylvania, my job was much harder. I have to be you know, very honest, just because so much has been done in terms of reporting from Pennsylvania, and I went to Ohio as well. So for a journalist, you know, foreign journalist to go into these new places, it's very hard. All the stories have been covered. Everything, you know, you're like looking and trying to find, you know, somebody who's not been interviewed. There are no people like that. Everybody's talked to the media a million times. You know, both industry and people on sort of like opposed to it are very media savvy. You know, you cannot have, like in Poland, you know, you go and you talk to the people and they won't tell you all their stories. And here it's all about the message, and this industry group wants this message, and the anti-fracking activists another message. So for me, it's been very taxing in that way. But still, I decided to sort of look into something that, because I was doing a story right on Edward Savitsky, and he was a very interesting character to me. And he was a farmer, a dairy farmer, and so I wanted to look what's happening in Pennsylvania with dairy farming. You know, sort of a quick snapshot at least. You know, let's say if Poland developed its resources in these places, what would happen 4 or 5 years ahead? So it was like a jump, like a, you know, return to the future, or something like that. So I jumped ahead into the future, and you know, Pennsylvania. I went to Bradford County, Pennsylvania. Now, Bradford County is famous for being the most drilled county in the Marcellus Shale. It has about almost 2,000 wells. Not all of them are, of course, they're multi-well paths, right? You have several paths several wells running from one path. So don't imagine that there are like 2,000, you know, separate pieces. But still, it's a big number for a very, very small county, 63,000 people. And so it's been there. The most intensive development has been going on. It's interesting because it's rural, you know, unlike Western PA, which has seen so much industry. You know, Pennsylvania was actually the first state to develop oil in the United States. Colonel Edwin Drake in 1859 did that. But in any case, Pennsylvania has seen some lumber, you know, sort of industry booms, and in the past, Bradford County, but not that much. And so the industry was something completely new to farmers. There were no pipelines laid, nothing like that. Now, of course, the money that has flowed into this little county has been enormous. I mean, there's no doubt about this. Farmers have received $160 million in leases. That does not mean that every farmer is what they call a shaleonaire. It means that, you know, some farmers have sold their land for as little as $5 an acre, and then the company, you know, let's say in 2006 when they didn't know anything was going on, right? And then the company would buy this or resell it then to another company for much higher. Land speculation is another thing within this industry that's very interesting to investigate, but I'm just mentioning it out there maybe for a discussion later on. But what's happening is you have a farm and then you have a pad. I mean, it's very, like the whole countryside, you can see that. You know, it's basically, with this new industry, what we have is that the line between industry and residences has been erased. You don't have any more, I mean, yes, you have, of course, places where industry and people have always lived together, so to speak. But in these places, it's sort of like you're bunching together the industry and where people live. So it's literally in their backyards. Now this is another pad that I visited. These are our frac, containers for flowback. So these containers are taken by a semi truck and oftentimes shipped to Ohio, where they're injected into deep injection wells. The geology of Pennsylvania does not allow for this. You can see sort of everywhere infrastructure, and it's thousands of pipelines are being built through forests and fragmenting land. This is actually a map of Bradford County with all the wells. You can see. I mean, this is a 10-mile scale here. So I mean, the whole thing is 20 miles. You can see how intensive the development is within Bradford. And I decided to look, a little bit more critically, so to speak, because the industry has been saying, okay, there's all this money coming to farmers, and they're revitalizing the dairy industry and the farming industry, and people suddenly who've been struggling, farmers, they can invest in new machinery, and they can invest in new stuff, and you can save farming through gas. Now, of course, there have been cases like this. Nobody denies it. I mean, they're different people. But generally, what I found the trend while traveling through Bradford County is that farmers who take some of the money would basically shutter their farms because it's so uneconomical to do dairy farming and so on. So the whole chain of supply of the dairy farms has been, sort of threatened to collapse because of this. Now, already, I'll show you. This is again. This is Carol French. She's like one of the dairy farmers, and this is her water actually went white, in 2011 when wells started being drilled. So water pollution is it's sometimes the case. It doesn't happen from fracking underneath. It happens from usually faulty casings and cementing. That's where it usually comes from. And the industry has statistics on this. It's 6% per new well. 6% of all new wells fail. But in any case, I'll talk to this, for example, farmer as well as Sheila Russell, whose family has been living there for 200 and odd years. She's a 7th generation Russell, and her ancestors moved the last year of George Washington's presidency onto the farm. And now she's doing organic farming, but suddenly she's got a well right next to her property. She sold the rights for $5 an acre in 2006, and the well started leaking methane. From faulty faulty cementing, and nobody told her for almost a year. Now she has to water her organic crops, through another fat pond spring because, even if there is no pollution to her water, the perception of raising your crops in a place which is industrial, it's already decreased her her customers from New York, let's say. But basically, again, there are people who have benefited from the industry, but there is also another side, and you have to look a little bit more critically into how the industry is affecting the farmers, is affecting the land, is affecting the economics of it. And already, I can tell you, there is a bust in the Marcellus, right? Because prices have been so depressed by overproduction of gas that companies have been moving out of the Marcellus, where there's dry gas, to either other formations in eastern Ohio, Utica Shale, where it's wet gas full of natural gas liquid, so it's more profitable. But if you look at the portfolios of companies, except for Chevron, who are very bullish on this, most of the companies are moving away from natural gas into oil and other places because prices were $2 to $3 per million BTUs, which is the thermal unit used for this, and break even is $4 or $5. So companies have also been losing on this, and there's been, what happens when suddenly there is a bust, because the fossil fuel industry always goes on, like booms and busts. So, this whole project has been about how do we develop from here on into the future? What do we do? Do we continue to sort of use fossil fuels and to sort of perpetuate this, and while putting renewables a little bit to the side, I mean, how does this affect other industries? How does it affect all of us? And I think these are important questions, and I think all of you have shown up here just because, I mean, the issue could be so boring sometimes, but it's so monumental these days that everybody's interested. So thank you again for being here. I'm here to answer questions for the Q&A session. Sorry this has run a little bit longer than I intended. But, any kind of questions you have, I'll be happy to answer. Thank you.
Adam is going to go carry the mic around, and it will help if you speak into the microphone when you're asking your questions. Thank you so very much.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentation. I was wondering a couple of things, and that is there any talk in Europe about the global warming, the effect of the greenhouse gas on global warming? Bill McKibben tells us we have to keep 80% of the carbon in the ground. So are they talking about that?
Well, that has been actually one of the main issues in Europe. Europe has this thing called, the European Commission adopted the Energy Roadmap 2050, which envisions that by 2050 Europe will decrease its CO2 emissions between 85 and 90%. Now, whether this is realistic or not, it's another thing. But there is a very strong sense in Europe, and there was a European Commission study, a poll recently done on, I think, 25,000 Europeans, and were asked about different kinds of energy, and only a little bit more than 10% supported shale gas. The majority of Europeans supported renewables, and so of course this has been at the forefront of the agenda there, and it's that has been one of the issues. I mean, I can talk about Europe's need of gas and how it relates, but it will go too much into like industry stuff. Yes, sir.
Could you say something about oversight and monitoring in Europe versus the United States?
Yeah. Well, there is currently a debate within the European Commission of whether to adopt stricter rules specifically related to shale gas, or whether the current directives on wastewater, on waste, directive on waste, directive on water are sufficient to do that. Now, the European Union came out with a legal study in 2011 looking at specifically different cases in Europe whether legislation is sufficient, and the study concluded that for now it's sufficient, but because shale gas requires such huge economies of scale and it requires such huge development, maybe within the exploration stage it's sufficient, but within a sort of a bigger type of development, there should be new rules that would guide this. And Poland has been very much opposed to it. So there is between the Environmental Commission and the Energy Commission, there are all these fights in the European Union, as they always are. Business lobby, sort of the more environmentalist lobby. But yeah, there are talks right now of adopting stringent rules in case there's bigger development.
I'd also like to thank you for a really interesting presentation. My question is kind of peripheral, but I noticed in the maps you were showing early on that in this lower right-hand corner of the Europe map, it seemed to show a shale gas area just south of Turkey in what looked to be part of northern Syria. Yeah. Is that the case? And do you have any remarks on the political implications of that?
Turkey has been actually thinking of developing its shale resources. And so Poland has formed bilateral relations with Turkey, Mexico, and China. Very interesting. Sort of the shale gas developing countries. And so, yeah, Turkey is thinking about this. Whether it would happen, I don't know. Again, I think it's a very, very complex sort of industry that can be developed only when there are huge economies of scale. Small-scale shale gas development is an oxymoron. It cannot happen. It cannot happen economically, and that's why I very much think that a country by itself in Europe cannot develop this kind of resource. It has to be a European decision on a bigger scale. And then you have economies of scale that can support this kind of industry. But otherwise, in countries going by themselves, we see what happens in Poland. Prices shoot up through the roof.
Hi. You mentioned how it was very difficult reporting in Pennsylvania because as a foreign journalist, most people had been asked these questions 1,000 times. I was wondering how you got past that and managed to make contributions to the story.
Well, you know, I mean, I hope I have passed that. I hope I have made a meaningful contribution. You know, sometimes people are a little bit more open with foreign reporters. Oh, he's foreign, you know, he doesn't speak our language, and so you get a little bit more access, I think, and so that has been good. I went also to Youngstown, Ohio, my favorite place from all, actually. I decided to call it the Buckle of the Rust Belt, and you know, Bruce Springsteen has a song about Youngstown. I mean, it's really interesting because Youngstown exemplifies, for example, a really interesting part of the shale industry. On the one hand, you know, it received actually, you know, the steel industry there collapsed, as in most of the United States, this part of the United States, in the late 70s, early 80s. And now it's a very poor community, you know, shuttered homes and so on. So people are in need of jobs, you know. I mean, if Youngstown is not in need of jobs, I don't know what place is. And sort of the industry, a French company, by the way, which, you know, banned fracking in France, but hey, a French company built a steel mill, the first big steel mill since the collapse, called V&M plant. That was a $650 million investment, and they hired 350 people. So a lot of the people are excited about the industry there. They think this could revitalize the place. On the other hand, just across the factory is an injection well, deep injection well, which last year, it takes wastewater from Pennsylvania, and last year caused 12 earthquakes. So you have in a very small sort of scale both sides of the industry exemplified in that. And you know, I hope I've managed to do some contributions. I don't know, you know, that's not for me to judge.
Thanks for the presentation. I actually lived in Poland 2 years ago, and I had no idea the scale of fracking in Poland. Mm-hmm. So if Poland is the sort of frontier or proving ground in Europe for fracking, and it proves successful, like what are the next sites in Europe for development?
The UK has been looking into this. UK, you know, they had a sort of a short moratorium on this after some earthquakes were caused by Cadrilla resources up in northeastern England. But they lifted, as far as I know, they lifted the moratorium. Now they're looking at exploration of this. But England has also very, very sort of big stakes in wind energy and wants to develop in that direction. So I don't see really this developing on a huge scale anywhere in Europe, to tell you the truth. I mean, that's my personal point of view and my personal opinion.
Hi. I have two major concerns. One is that, as I understand it, fracking, whether vertical anyway, has been around 40 years.
From 1947, 1948.
Okay.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And the horizontal fracking is newer. But as I understand it, there really aren't a lot of good long-term statistics mm-hmm. about the actual dangers. Methane was mentioned, but I don't think you touched on the possibility, and water pollution was mentioned, but the possibility of earthquakes and various ground settling, sinkholes, who knows what is going on beneath. I mean, I just wonder if you would be able to comment on what you know of current research and projects going on. And then my other really big concern is here in Illinois, as I understand it, there is absolutely no legislation on the books to regulate shale gas mining at all. And that frightens me. I was told tonight by someone in the know that the companies themselves are working on this legislation. And to me, that sounds very dangerous. Yeah. So probably you couldn't comment on what's going on in Illinois. Maybe someone else could. But if you would talk about the research, I'd appreciate it.
There are a lot of things I didn't touch upon. This is, as I said, this is like such a huge issue. But I think generally that this concern that the fracking underneath like so many layers of land could affect the groundwater, the studies indicate, if you read the International Energy Agency studies, they indicated in rare cases where people do not know the fault lines, maybe some liquids could seep in into the groundwater. There are also studies on injection wells. Abraham Lingard in ProPublica wrote a huge study on investigation on pollution coming from injection wells deep underground. So these could be resources that you could use. But generally, I think mostly the danger from water contamination comes from faulty casings and cementing, which the industry cannot prevent even if they use the best practices. It's just a margin of error that you do. And the more development you do, of course, the margin of error gets bigger. Now, your second question about Illinois, one thing I understood, I'm very confused when I was in the United States doing this issue, is how different legislation is from state to state. When I was in Ohio, there was ODNR, Ohio Department of Natural Resources. They have one type of rules, and then you go to Pennsylvania, you have to forget completely everything that you've learned. And then there's DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. And they're Pennsylvania is generally very business friendly and lax regulations. Ohio has more regulations. So state to state, it's very different. And I think that has been one of the reasons it's so difficult to regulate this on a national level. It's just every state is on their own, and that's what they do. And the EPA, the study is supposed to come out in next year or 2012, 15, but you never know. So that's my little comment on this. Yeah.
I would be happy to let the whole thing go if they could get the pollution out of the water so that you just put it back in the lakes or whatever. And if they could seal the system so that methane would go out.
Yeah.
If they did that, I'd say fine. But they're not doing that yet. Is the technology going in that direction? Do you have confidence that they're going to make that within our lifetimes?
There is talk of new technologies that do not use water, propane foam, for example. They're experimental projects, but they've the prices have run up so high for this kind of. It's even more expensive than water. So and again, as I'm saying, this is a type of extraction that requires a constant investment in upstream, because the decline rates of wells. Shale gas wells are, according to the International Energy Agency, between 50 and 75% in the first year. Now, there's a lot of discussion of how big the decline rate is. But generally, in order to keep up production, you have to keep on drilling and drilling and drilling and drilling. So it's not like a conventional well where you just put investment upstream and then you wait for investment to pay off in 20, 30 years. Here, you have to constantly have investment, new investment in order to keep on going. And we saw what happened with Chesapeake. They sold off $13 billion of assets last year. Aubrey McClendon just resigned as a CEO. The company is in big financial trouble. It's I'm surprised. I feel it's more like a financial bubble. It's part of the 2008 bubble, sort of continuing in certain ways. People trying to find new ways for investment after the collapse of the housing bubble. And if I were a company executive, I don't think I would think twice before investing in this kind of technology actually, and I would be looking for a safer sort of source of return for my investment.
Is there any possibility of exploration under the water, the seas, or the ocean?
I think that's, it's been talked about. I think that's too expensive. Again, we have to look at the economics, and I think, we look at a lot of the environmental issues, but, I think if how should I say, if companies see that, remember the time when British Petroleum was beyond petroleum? It's a matter of these companies realizing that they have to go into the whole energy business, right? Not just in fossil fuels. And once they see that this technology is profitable, or maybe their profit margins would not be as big, but there needs to be a push for that. Otherwise, we just develop new technologies about finding more and more inaccessible fuels all around the world. And we'll find them. As somebody mentioned here, the McKibben article with the big numbers, that we have 5 times more reserves than safely to burn. But generally, I feel that if companies need to go in that direction, I think it's their responsibility too. I don't know how much responsibility you can take from the oil and gas business. But I feel that, there are different companies there even. It's not the same. You cannot put them all in the same sort of, the same thing. So any case, that's my take on this.
I'd like to thank you very much for your presentation. I really enjoyed it. And I was going to ask if you could expound a little more on one of your introductory comments about how working on this, and you listed other things you had worked on, how this has affected you more profoundly or something. And I wonder if it had to do with the global geographic perspective of it, or if you could just expound more on that. Comment you made.
I have become a nervous wreck. I'm serious. It's, just yesterday, I wrote this article on the dairy farming in Bradford County, and immediately, the Marcellus Shale Coalition and Energy in Depth, which are the industry-sponsored groups, attacked me on their blog. I give it to them. They're, very fast. But what I didn't understand is I quoted, all of the other statistics about the number of investments going into the state and so on. And so what they said is that everything positive I said about the industry was fact. And all the quotes I put from farmers who are, suffering from this was claim. I try to represent both sides. The, Chamber of Commerce is there, county commissioner, all of the people. But still they'll hang on to anything you say against the industry, even if it's constructive, I think, to them, and they would attack you. So I'm a sort of an emotional person, and I take these things very personally. So it's been hard for me.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. So earlier you said that this is sort of a bubble. Do you think as a result of that, it's not going to be economically viable in the long term and eventually the industry will just sort of wither away? Or do you think it's going to be a bubble that bursts but then grows again? In other words, in the long term, are people still going to be talking about shale gas excitedly, 20 years from now?
Well, when I was in Williamsport in Pennsylvania, which is pretty much the capital of the shale industry, there in the Marcellus, all the companies are based out of there. I went to speak to different hotel managers and restaurants, and because of this bust that's been going on in the last year, because of low gas prices, all the drillers are going away. So new hotels that were built and, or new additions to hotels, they're almost empty now. And people are saying, but the industry is promising us that within 2 years, when the gas prices increase, they're going to come back and continue drilling. So that might be the case. They're still laying the infrastructure in Pennsylvania, even though there's not so much drilling. There's still a lot of pipeline construction going on. I think it's actually very dangerous to base all other, because right now in the steel industry, there's a lot of talk from Dow Jones Chemicals. They're going to build all these, chemical plants around cheap gas, and Shell building, cracker plants around cheap gas. But what happens is that when you build an industry around such a volatile resource like gas or oil, is that you could have the whole thing collapse within a couple of years. I think it's not a very good strategy generally. If we're talking about national security, that's one thing. And of course, because the companies have not profited so much in the last years, now they want to export LNG, liquefied natural gas, to Europe in order to increase the prices of the resource. But when you increase the prices, oil and gas companies would make more money. But then the manufacturers who have been relying on cheap gas for their manufacturing would be suffering. So in a sense, you have even two industries against each other here. And I think you have to rely on a more, I don't know what to predict. I'm not, a prophet. But I can say this, that, we've seen gas-fired plants were built between the late 90s and early 2000s in the United States, lots of them, because of cheap gas prices. And they ended up underutilized because, increase of gas and, coal stayed cheap, CO2 prices were, cheap. And so, in any case, I think it's very dangerous to do that around just one resource that's cheap today, but next year it's not. Yeah.
You mentioned China. I was wondering if you could comment on what state of evolution they are there, if it's a viable alternative for coal, and maybe even touch a little bit on water. I mean, we have a lot of cheap, fresh water in the U.S. They don't have that same resource there, and how much of a factor that is in the economics of this industry.
I don't know much about China. What I've read is that where their shale gas resources are, there's a shortage of water, so the Chinese are considering that. I mean, I think they've destroyed pretty much all their water resources in the last years, and they're more cautious these days. So I don't know. I don't know about the Chinese. I think they're a type of country that can develop things on a huge scale if they want to, right? It depends on how cheap the gas is, though, because Russia wants to export gas to China, and that was one of the things in Poland, actually. First Russia had different prices of gas for Poland, and really higher than the Germans. And that's why Poles wanted to exploit the shale gas resource to decrease the price. And now the Russians decreased the price. And what's the incentive of developing these resources anymore? So I think something similar could happen in China. They could, Russia, they're in very active negotiations with China to export gas there. And, a conventional gas through pipeline is just so much cheaper than shale gas at this point that I think that's what's going to happen rather than shale gas there.
I was wondering, one of the main effects of the shale gas revolution is also the relationship to coal and driving out coal. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Well, it's true. I mean, that has been one of the driving engines, right? Of course, we need to get off coal. It's pretty dirty. Now, again, whether this is a solution, I'm not quite sure. Looking at the studies, even if shale gas is sort of, less polluting than coal, is it worth it to start a whole new industry around a whole new fossil fuel? I personally, I totally support, getting off of coal and trying to use more gas. But at the same time, when you look at the cost benefits, you have to look at it the whole way. Germany has been, pretty good with renewables, but they also have a lot of coal plants. So I don't know what to say. About this. I'm not saying. I'm just saying that the shale gas industry is not a solution to the coal industry. If people think that, it's, I don't know. I think rather than shale is maybe a sort of supportive industry for some kind of smaller scale, I don't know. Really, it's a little bit difficult question for me to answer. I don't feel as good on coal. So maybe somebody here in the room is and can answer the question better.
I think we have time for one more question.
So these concessions in Poland are given by the government, right? And you said there's 111?
111.
30 companies?
About.
Where are they from? How many are Polish? How many are internationals? Are we talking Royal Dutch Shell? Or who's in charge? If this is supposed to be energy independence, how much is actually Polish?
Yeah, it's a good question. Actually, most of the companies are foreign companies, American companies, Canadian companies mostly. But they make usually some kind of partnership with Polish companies. Now, Poland is also not helping actually this resource, the government, because they want to impose a 40% tax on gross profits of the gas industry. They want to follow the example of Norway and Denmark, which, kudos to the Polish government for, wanting to have this benefit, for this gas benefit their people. Except that, looking at it from a sort of industry's point of view, and it's one thing to go and to drill in the North Sea where you have guaranteed, returns. It's completely different to basically do this in Poland. Now, what's the Polish? What I know, this is sort of info from some, insiders, is that the Polish government is actually trying to push away all the foreign companies and have the local monopolist PGNiG take over the shale gas, and they're developing their own fracking technology right now and so on. So despite the fact that the U.S. has been very active in Poland, I think the Polish are playing sort of a double game. They're we want our company to take over this resource. So it's a little bit of a political game there as well.
Here we go. We want to thank Dimiter and Stan so very, very much. Calkins Media and the Pulitzer Center very, very much.
The World Beyond the Headlines lecture series is a project of the University of Chicago Center for International Studies. Our nationally recognized programming is made possible with support from the Norman Waite Harris Memorial Fund. Download recordings of other events and learn more about the World Beyond the Headlines series at the Center for International Studies website, cis.uchicago.edu.